forms following the classical principles of design developed by Andrea Palladio during the Italian Renaissance. In the mid-1600s, architects Indigo Jones and Christopher Wren began designing buildings. Today, we'll talk about the Georgian period in American architecture. As you read in the textbook, widely used architectural labels, such as Georgian and Federal, are derived from historical periods, and they have, in turn, come to elicit fairly specific visual images. No doubt, you'd soon be able to visualize and cite examples of those styles yourselves, too. In any case, that's why, say, Hampton Plantation in Townsend, Maryland, was not built while the Georges of England ruled the American colonies between 1714 and 1775, but nevertheless is classified as Georgian. Well, the image runs ahead of reality, actually behind reality in this case, doesn't it? Georgian style refers to a style originated in England in the 1600s, based on forms following the classical principles of design developed by Andrea Palladio during the Italian Renaissance. In the mid-1600s, architects Indigo Jones and Christopher Wren began designing buildings using Palladio's design principles. This style became wildly popular in England, replacing the medieval. The Georgian period in American architecture began about 1700 with construction of the Wren Building at the College of William and Mary. It was named after its architect. Although old architectural history books extended this period in American architecture until 1830, the end of the reign of George IV, most scholars now agree that in America, the style generally ran its course by the 1780s. The 8-year hiatus of construction during the Revolutionary War essentially ended the Georgian period of architecture in its original form. Later, it would be renewed in revival styles. Thus, this is one of the longest-lived architectural styles in America. Well, many of the founders of the nation lived in handsome, capacious buildings along the eastern seaboard, which were built in this style, and the sites of historic events of the Revolutionary War that we can still visit were built in this style too. Another noteworthy thing about this style is that, while earlier styles were disseminated among craftsmen through the direct experience of the apprenticeship system, Georgian architecture was spread among builders through the new medium of inexpensive collections of engravings as well. Leone's first English publication of Palladio's work between 1716 and 1720, and a host of other handbooks from England, all influenced American building arts and increased the academic formal quality of the Georgian style. And eventually, from the mid-18th century, Georgian styles were assimilated into an architectural parlance, so that they became part and parcel of the training of every carpenter and plasterer, from Edinburgh to Maryland. So, Georgian designs reached the American colonies in the form of architectural manuals and pattern books by the mid-1700s, when New England was enjoying its building boom. Wealth was accumulating along the eastern seaboard. Wealthy captains, merchants, shipyard owners, and mill owners were developing new social classes. New standards of sophistication and elegance were being established. In the colonies, style now mattered. Many of those in the burgeoning wealthy classes visited England and looked to England for precedents of fashion and taste, and those they found. They were eager to have the new Georgian-style home that displayed status, wealth, and taste. So Georgian style was all over the place, from Maine to Virginia in the British colonies. Just as Palladio in the 16th century had freely adapted Roman classical forms, and Wren and his followers did heavily emulate the work of this Italian architect, so did American builders borrow the English architectural style wholesale and with a vengeance. This new style involved new concepts of living. The multiplication of rooms led to increased specialization of rooms into separate rooms for sleeping, cooking, dining, and so forth. Comfort, convenience, and privacy were beginning to play a role in the colonists' lifestyle as they increased their wealth. After the Revolution, Georgian conventions were slowly abandoned as a number of revival styles, such as Gothic revival, enlarged the design repertoire. Another reason for this was its association with the colonial regime. Curiously, though, Pennsylvanians continued building Georgian houses until the 1860s, the time of the Civil War, while New Englanders abandoned the Georgian style for the most part before 1800. By the way, in Canada, Georgian architecture was embraced as a sign of Canadians' loyalty to Britain, and the style was dominant for most of the first half of the 19th century. Okay, let's look at the distinctive features of the style. Georgian architecture is characterized by its sense of proportion and balance. Simple mathematical ratios were used to determine, for example, the height of a window in relation to its width or the shape of a room. Regular was a term of approval because it implies symmetry and adherence to classical rules. On the other hand, the lack of symmetry was felt to be a fatal flaw. Regularity of house fronts along a street was a desirable feature of Georgian town planning. Georgian designs usually include one or more of the orders of architecture and other elements derived from ancient Rome or Greece. Oh, what are orders? Yes.
Orders are formalized systems of proportions, and Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian are the major Greek classical orders.
Yup. Now, look at page 79. You can see these defining features of Georgian architecture. Renaissance-inspired rigid classical symmetry, axial entrances, geometrical proportions, and sash windows in which the framing, the sash, holds panes of glass. You see what I mean? As you may also notice, a British Georgian building has a hinged roof sloping down on all four sides. An American one, side gable roof. See? Now, look at the drawings on page 81 and look for the features of the most dominant influence in Georgian architecture, namely Palladian. Well, the features of Palladian design were especially prevalent in the mid-Georgian period. Look at those of the Virginia Governor's Palace in Williamsburg and Drayton Hall near Charleston, South Carolina. Do you spot the Palladian influence? These buildings are the epitomes of American Georgian architecture, and you can distinctly see the hand of Palladio in them. To name a couple, the large classical columns and the two-story portico, which is a large porch, usually with a roof that is supported by those classical columns. And of course, even now, we often hear the term the Palladian window, a tall window with flanking two smaller rectangles and a rounded top, which you can find on many buildings, most often on the second story, directly above the front entrance, from all the periods since then. After almost a century of reviving European styles, late 19th century American architects began to look to their own national past for appropriate models in their creation. Architects and builders revived and modified the styles to accommodate the more modern lifestyle and taste of the new century. That is to say, they created their colonial revival styles from the Georgian style. In their eagerness to ensure that the design heritage would be recognized, the architects often exaggerated their case. They also had to find ways to apply 18th century details to buildings that were decidedly 19th century in size and function, such as railroad stations and public schools. To accomplish this, elements of the Georgian style were emphasized in various ways, by changes of scale, by combinations of features used in ways unknown to the 18th century, or simply by repetition. It is such emphasis that helps distinguish the parent from the child. So, even though we now have examples of original Georgian and Georgian revival homes and buildings to consider, you will be able to spot the original from the revival with enough time and practice. Can we still find new buildings of the style? Certainly. Although the Georgian revival enjoyed its greatest popularity and most vigorous expression in the last decades of the 19th century and the first of the 20th, it is still pretty much a part of our architectural scene. Well, unfortunately, however, most modern examples suggest that the creative revival of the Georgian style is a thing of the past. Today, we'll talk about the Georgian period in America.